Welcome to Believing the Word with author and pastor Dan Shunk. This program is a ministry of Calvary Chapel Chambersburg in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania. Here's what's coming up in today's message.
And one of the things on a very high level to not forget from this chapter is he never forgets anyone. He never forgets their involvement with his people. You think there's somebody that's harming you, that's getting away with it? If you're the child of the king, he sees it and he won't let them get away with it. Justice comes to everyone. And none of these nations, in all of their impressive skills and all of their impressive abilities and all of who they made themselves into, some of them lived in dens and tried to be all independent. And it didn't save them. Some of them tried to be all out there public and proud, and it didn't save them. Some tried to be wealthy. Some tried to be mighty. None of it works.
Justice feels uneven. Some are held accountable, others seem untouchable. Jeremiah 49 shatters that illusion. God speaks to nations who believed their strength, location, or influence put them beyond judgment. One by one, he reminds them, and us, that no one is outside his reach. No injustice is overlooked, no arrogance goes unnoticed. This chapter declares a sobering truth and a steady hope. God is the judge of all the earth, and his justice is certain. It may not be immediate, but it is inevitable, and it is always right. Now here's Pastor Dan in the book of Jeremiah as he continues his message, and justice for all.
Damascus is, even to this day, Damascus is the oldest continuously inhabited city in the world. It has never yet been destroyed. You can go back even to the stories of Abraham. Do you know in the story of Abraham something to do with Damascus? And that's 2000 BC. You remember Abraham was praying for a son. What did he say to the Lord when he said, Lord, are you going to allow me to have a son? Right now, this servant of mine from Damascus is my heir. Right? So even then, this remark about Eliezer, his servant from Damascus. Even later on in Abraham's story, there's another instance with Damascus. Do you remember when Lot gets taken prisoner from the 5 kings? And then Abraham has to go rescue him, and Abraham chases down these 5 armies. I'm still picturing that in my head, by the way. Abraham with his large family army chasing after these 5 small kingdoms, to get back Lot. I mean, that's amazing. That's amazing. I want to see that. I want to see the reel-to-reel of that when I get to heaven, how he did that. But where did he chase him to? He chased him the whole way back to Damascus before he got Lot and brought him back home. And so Damascus, this very, very prominent city throughout so many, I want to say decades, but I mean, millennia, even more than centuries throughout the timeline. They have been there, and they have always been there. And we know that they're still there today, and yet there's this prophecy coming soon to a theater near you in, let's see if I've got it up here, Isaiah chapter 17. Tells us in chapter 17, verse 1, this is the oracle or the word concerning Damascus. Behold, Damascus is about to be removed from being a city and will become a fallen ruin. That's never happened yet in world history. It's never, ever ceased from being a city. All of these other nations we've looked at, Babylon or somebody conquers, takes over, wipes them out, nothing's left. And yet this has never, ever happened to Damascus. And so many biblical scholars are still looking for this to yet happen. It seems that maybe this could be the trigger that would launch us into the Ezekiel 38 and 38 war, where Russia, Iran, and Turkey come against Israel. It could be the trigger. Who knows how these things are going to line up and piece together. All I know is that there are many people bombing at the Damascus airport all the time. Even just yesterday, there was some more terrorists that were taken out at a place right off the runway as they brought in more weapons. It seems like they bring in more weapons and then they bomb them as soon as they bring in the weapons. So that's happening all the time. It'll be interesting to see what happens in Damascus in the very near future and how that might line up with Russia's involvement in the Middle East. I don't know if you've seen, here's another interesting piece of the story of how this all goes together. You might think, well, Russia still has nothing to do with the Middle East. Yes, they do. They have been all through Syria for the last 10 years since the Syrian civil war broke out. And just the other day, I saw some soldiers, Russian soldiers still in Ukraine, but Russian soldiers in Ukraine that were wearing the Hezbollah badge on their uniforms. And so that's the alliance that's being formed between these Muslim nations with Russia. And certainly Turkey is right there too. Turkey is one of the most fascinating countries of all this. They became a NATO country two decades ago. So America and others have this Article 5 requirement to support them. And yet Turkey just a week or two ago went to the UN and asked to use lethal force against Israel to beat them back out of Lebanon and other places. So it's no wonder why America would have to stand on the sidelines if Russia and Turkey and Iran invade Israel. And as Ezekiel says, the young nations just look on and say, what are you doing? Have you come to take a spoil? And we don't do anything about it, as if our hands are tied. So we don't know exactly the order and operation of how these things are going to line up, but man, every year things come clearer and clearer on how it could happen and the order of how things might line up. And so Damascus still has a lot of activity to yet happen in the very near future. We go to verse 28. This brings us to the fourth of 5 nations we're going to look at here. We use the word nation very loosely for the next one we're going to look at from verse 28 through verse 33. This is really Arabia. It's really the Arabian tribes. All of these that we're going to look at here are in modern Saudi Arabia. Why do we call it Saudi Arabia? It's the house of Saud. It's a family. It's a family of the Saud family. I don't know what order. Sometimes you put the last names first and the first names last, different things. But it's the Saud family. I don't know if I'm saying that the proper way. That's how it got the name, the modern name in the 20s of Saudi Arabia. Okay, it's just Arabia, but now it's called Saudi Arabia in this area. Well, we're going to look at some of these. I don't even want to say cities. You can't say cities when you're talking about Arabia. You really want to talk about placements, settlements. It's not villages. They were a nomadic people. So maybe there's a better word, but certainly city isn't the word. So we're going to look at some of these places like Kedar and Hazor, Dedan. I wouldn't call them cities, but they were certainly large centers of people in ancient Arabia. Let's just go with that. So starting in verse 28, we'll look at Arabia. Concerning Kedar and the kingdoms of Hazor. And even, by the way, the word Hazor here may be one of these times where it's actually not even talking about a specific place named Hazor. There was at least 4 different places in the scripture that got this word, but the word just means an enclosed settlement. And so most scholars, and I would also agree, not that I'm a scholar, but I would also agree that this is not intending to talk about a specific place, but just it's intending to say the kingdoms of the enclosed settlements. Is what it's intending to say. So Kedar and all of these other settlements, which Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, struck down. Thus saith Yahweh, arise, go up to Kedar and destroy the men of the east. And so we can get into Ezekiel's prophecy about Kedar, and it tells us that Kedar was specifically here in Arabia. Kedar was either a son or a grandson of Ishmael. We'd have to go back to Genesis 10 and look at that. But certainly all of the Ishmaelites went down either into Arabia or into Egypt. And Kedar is either a son or a grandson of Egypt. If anybody wants to look that up in Genesis 10, let me know. That'd be great. Some of the notable places down here in Arabia of this day was, when you might know some of these, Sheba and Dedan. Sheba and Dedan are mentioned together when we get into the prophecy of Ezekiel 38 and 39. With that war we've been talking about with Russia, Turkey, and Iran coming against Israel. Sheba and Dedan are listed as not doing anything about it, just standing back and watching. Now, look, right now today, that doesn't sound amazing that Saudi Arabia would just take a hands-off approach. But just 10 to 15 to 20 years ago, Saudi Arabia was just as hateful towards Israel as anybody. But today they're on the brink of peace with Israel, as Jordan and Egypt have with Israel today. So, even Saudi Arabia, every year they line up more and more with the way the scripture says they will be in that last day. So some of the notable cities other than Kedar is Sheba and Dedan. And so let's go to verse 29. They will take away their tents and their flocks. They will carry off for themselves their tent curtains, all their goods and their camels, and they will call out to one another, terror on every side. Verse 30, run away, flee earnestly, inhabit the depths, O inhabitants of Hazor, declares Yahweh. Why? For Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, has taken counsel against you and has purposed a purpose against you. Verse 31, arise, go up against a nation which is at ease. I think some translations have the word wealth right there, nations that are wealthy or something like that. That's not really a good translation. Verse 31 really should read that it's a call to Babylon to arise and go up against a nation at ease. That's really a better way to say it. Which inhabits its land securely, declares Yahweh. It has no gates or bars. They dwell alone. In verse 32, their camels will become plunder, and their many cattle for spoil. And I will scatter to all the winds those who cut the corners of their hair. That's a sign of mourning. And I will bring their disaster from every side, declares Yahweh. In verse 33, Hazor will become a haunt of jackals, a desolation forever. In other words, wilderness. No one will inhabit there, nor will a son of man sojourn in it. We just got done looking at, for example, Damascus, right? And we're like, oh, yep, there it is, still there today. You know, we looked at some of these other ones, Amman, Jordan, and we're like, oh, there it is today. We know exactly where it is. All of these nations, all of these cities, if you can call them cities here in Arabia, none of the biblical settlements of Arabia can be even found today. I don't know if you've done any geography of Saudi Arabia lately. The place is nothing but desert. I actually got on Google Maps the other day just to poke around. I don't know, time on my hands or what, but I was like, you know how on Google Maps you could drop a pin and you could do like street view and you could just look around, right? There was like 4 spots in all of Saudi Arabia that you could drop the little man and actually walk on the street and look around. That was it in the whole giant thing of Saudi Arabia. And everywhere you look, it's just sand and pipes coming up for oil. That's it. There's nothing there. None of these settlements that used to be can even be found today. So very interesting the way he describes that they will become a desolation forever. Of course, Nebuchadnezzar, it's described here, comes in and takes the spoil of their goods and of their animals. That's all described in what we just read. But there are giant swaths of Saudi Arabia today that just have nothing, no inhabitants, no man-made structures of any kind. You know, Saudi Arabia's huge. Go look on a map sometime. It's got a couple of places where there's people, and other than that, there's nothing there. I mean, you think going to like northern Maine, there's nothing there but trees, or, you know, we just had some people in New England. You think it gets pretty sparse up there. You take a look at Saudi Arabia sometime. I know some of you have driven across the Midwest and you just drive straight, you know, and it looks like the earth is curving because the road is so long and straight and there's nothing there, right? But at least there's man-made structures. And I'm telling you, there's giant areas where you just see nothing but sand forever. And it just keeps going. And this perfectly describes that area today. So we're not really here in Jeremiah given a reason for their judgment by Babylon, but certainly God allows it. And this certainly shows the extent that Babylon conquered and that Babylon truly became world rulers. I mean, this area of Arabia is pretty far south for Babylon, and they went the whole way down there and did all this conquering to take over the whole world. And so we already mentioned how in the last days, Sheba and Dedan, this area of Saudi Arabia, will disagree with this war that Russia launches against Israel. And so I think Saudi Arabia is already there today. I think they were this close to signing a peace deal with Israel. And then we had a new presidential election 4 years ago that limited that. So more to come out of Saudi Arabia in a good way in the future. Verse 34 brings us our last nation to look at tonight. And this is a lesser known nation to some of you in the room. This is the nation of Elam, E-L-A-M, Elam, that we're going to look at to finish the chapter. And this makes the case Elam's might, their military force and strength, is not enough to save them. None of these nations had what it took to save them in the day of justice. Let's just read a couple of verses to get started with Elam, and then we'll talk about where they're at on the map. Verse 34, that which came as the word of the Lord to Jeremiah the prophet concerning Elam in the beginning of the reign of Zedekiah, king of Judah. So this just places when Jeremiah wrote this. Verse 35, thus saith Yahweh of hosts, behold, I am going to break the bow of Elam, the finest of their might, and I will bring upon Elam the four winds from the four ends of heaven, and I will scatter them to all these winds, and there will be no nation to which the banished ones of Elam will not go. They'll go everywhere. They're going to get scattered. So this is very, very clear that Elam as a nation won't remain as a distinct national identity. But remember, all these nations can be tracked back to know where they came from. Elam was actually one of Shem's sons, just getting off of the ark with Noah. Noah had the three boys that got off the ark and their wives, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Elam is one of Shem's sons. So Elam is a very, very ancient nation. Elam was founded, you can see there on the map, on the western edge of modern Iran. So it's right in almost that, it's the Fertile Crescent area there at the Persian Gulf. This, of course, is modern Iraq, and this is all Iran to the east of that. Elam was on that western edge of modern day Iran or Persia, whatever you want to call them today, same thing. And so Elam, it was an enduring nation, but they were almost always just a supported nation. They were never a powerhouse in any way. They were just this subordinate nation. They retained their identity through generation after generation, through the days of the Babylonians and the Persians in the Old Testament time period. But by the time the New Testament came around, the Elamites were of no consequence. In fact, in Abraham's day, we made mention of how Abraham had to fight the 5 armies to get back Lot, and then he chased them the whole way back to Damascus to get Lot back. Well, one of those 5 nations that Abraham had to fight against was the Elamites, the nation that we're reading about right now. So think about that and how far they traveled all over. Remember, Abraham was originally from Ur of the Chaldeans, which was not that far from ancient Elam anyway. So he would have already known all about the Elamites and their reputation. So these Elamites were just this supporting nation all the time. When the Babylonians began to rise in the days of Jeremiah, they began to support the Babylonians, Nebuchadnezzar's rise. And then they ended up rejecting him. Once they saw the Medes and the Persians begin to rise, the Elamites kind of turned traitor on the Babylonians and joined with Medo-Persians. And so they were just all over the place, just supporting whoever seemed to be the strongest one of the day. You'll know their capital, though. Their capital was Susa, and we read about their capital in the Bible in many different accounts. Even in this passage here, they tells us they're known for their archers, like in verse 35. God says he's going to break the bow of Elam. There's no mention here of why, but it does say that they are going to be scattered among the nations. And they end up being mixed with the Babylonians and the Medes and the Persians and the Alchemedian Empire that even comes after the Persians. So these Elamites end up mixing and fading out exactly the way this says here, that they're going to be scattered in verse 36, just scattered to the winds, and they will be no nation. And so we finish this in verse 37. So I will shatter Elam before their enemies and before those who seek their lives, and I will bring calamity upon them, even my burning anger, declares Yahweh. And I will send out the sword after them until I have consumed them. Then I will set my throne in Elam and cause king and princes from there to perish, declares Yahweh. But it will be in the latter days that I will return the fortunes or the captivity of Elam, declares Yahweh. So the Lord clearly here asserts his authority over the Elamites in this poetic language of I'm going to put my throne over them. And yet it says they will be regathered in the end. How that's going to happen, we'll wait and see how exactly the Lord wants to do that. So we've kind of come most of the way now through all of these nations that the Lord told Jeremiah to prophesy to. We've sort of tried to make the case on why it matters that he's working out his master plan with all of these nations. The next time we're together, Lord willing, unless he wants to take us to heaven right now, that'd be all right. We're going to look at Babylon in chapter 50 and 51. And this is very, very different because Babylon has an intricate role to play in the end days. All of Revelation 17 and 18 is exclusively all about Babylon. Did you know that? 2 chapters of the book of Revelation is all about Babylon. And so next time we're together, we're going to look at Babylon, their judgment that's listed here, and their role that they will yet play in the future. But for tonight, looking at chapter 49, let's just remind ourselves that we're not always going to come to the scripture and learn things only about us. Sometimes you come and you learn things about God. And one of the things on a very high level to not forget from this chapter is he never forgets anyone. He never forgets their involvement with his people. You think there's somebody that's harming you, that's getting away with it? If you're the child of the king, he sees it and he won't let them get away with it. Justice comes to everyone. And none of these nations, in all of their impressive skills and all of their impressive abilities and all of who they made themselves into, some of them lived in dens and tried to be all independent, and it didn't save them. Some of them tried to be all out there public and proud, and it didn't save them. Some tried to be wealthy. Some tried to be mighty. None of it works. All of these nations from chapter 46 through 51, they're all good examples of how they all looked different, and yet none of it was effective to save you in the day of judgment to come. What will it take to save in the day of judgment? Perfection. It takes perfection. And the only way to do that is to receive perfection at the cross. Christ was perfect, and now he's willing to offer that to us. There's a neat silver lining with these nations that we've looked at tonight. I just want to read down through these 5 real quick and then make a neat little closing comment. I hope you find it neat. These nations were not good enough to be saved of themselves. Ammon, they proved that wealth isn't good enough to save you. The nation of Edom that used to be, they proved that wisdom isn't enough to save you in the day of calamity. Damascus proves that having this great reputation and this as being the elder statesman, that won't save you. I was just today, I was around a couple of people where there was a gentleman in his late 50s talking to a young whippersnapper in his early 20s. And this guy in his 50s is usually pretty quiet, but man, he was talking to this young 20s guy, and you'd have just thought he was the king of the world, the way he was talking to this little younger 20-year-old guy. And it just reminded me, like we all kind of take that role sometimes when we feel like we can, like, I'm the elder statesman here, you'll listen to me, kind of thing. And that was kind of Damascus and what they were known for. They were known as like, we are the ones of reputation, you should listen to us, right? Then there's Arabia, out there in the desert, proving that independence is not enough to save you. You can't escape the problems of life. You have to face it. And then finally we looked at Elam. And Elam proves that no matter how strong you are, there's always going to be somebody else stronger around you. Somebody else stronger comes along and proves that you're not the big dog anymore. There's no self-achievement that is good enough to bring us into a perfect, right relationship with God. Only a relationship with Jesus Christ will do that at the cross. And yet, here's the interesting note. All of these nations, even going back a few chapters, all of these nations were represented on the day of Pentecost in Acts chapter 2. And so, you think of these nations being judged as a whole, and yet every one of these nations was represented as a nation that was visiting there in Jerusalem. The faithful people from all of these surrounding nations had come to Jerusalem to worship the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, and they got saved on the day of Pentecost. Remember, how do we hear them speaking in our languages? And it starts rattling off all these nations. We hear them in our dialect. We hear them in our dialect. And all of these nations are in that list. And that's just awesome. Don't ever forget that. You may think our country is doomed to be judged. Billy Graham has that famous expression where he said that if God doesn't judge America, then he owes Sodom and Gomorrah an apology. And I don't think that's too far off, okay? But don't think that means that has to be every individual's fate, right? Even though these nations had a heap of judgment that they wrapped up for themselves, individuals from every one of these nations came to the foot of the cross on the day of Pentecost and got saved. Isn't that awesome? And that could be the same for anybody here or listening to this tonight. All you have to do is bring your debt and have it paid at the cross. If you're more like Ammon, just say, Lord, none of my wealth will get me into heaven. Save me. Right? If you're like Elam and you say, Lord, I have tried to be strong, but I'm not strong enough. Lord, save me. He will. You can identify yourself with any one of these, and you can just say, Lord, I've been like them, and it's not good enough. I need you to save me. And he will. Praise the Lord.
You've been listening to Believing the Word, a ministry of author and pastor Dan Shunk at Calvary Chapel Chambersburg in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania. Pastor Dan has been teaching through a series in the book of Jeremiah. We'd love to get connected with you and hear about how God is working in your life through this teaching program. You can reach us by phone at 717-500-1102. Again, that number is 717-500-1102. You can also check us out at our website, cchambersburg.org, where you can learn more about the ministry of Calvary Chapel Chambersburg and find our chapter-by-chapter messages. If you're in the Chambersburg area, we'd love to have you join us Sunday mornings and Thursday evenings on 5121 Coffee Avenue. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll be back with more from the book of Jeremiah. But until then, this has been Believing the Word with Pastor Dan Shunk.